it sounds like we need to talk to your manager again because Cairn's back for round 2 in Cairn, 2nd edition. Cairn. It's the same joke.
That's fine. Just cut it before you do that.
No, I like everything I just did. Hey everybody, Jordan here. The PH is silent. I'm here with my good friend Lex, and we're going to talk about Cairn 2nd edition, which is the updated version of Cairn 1st edition. And so they do follow numerically. It's kind of interesting.
Like many RPGs.
Like many RPGs, except we need to have that weird time travel edition where it's like Cairn 7. And you're like, oh yeah, like the time travel edition that came from the future. But Lex, what is Cairn 2nd edition? And maybe a quick recap of Cairn 1E? I don't know. Go.
We don't need a recap. People if you want to check out our review of Cairn 1st edition, there will be a link in the description, so feel free to go do that. But Cairn 2nd edition is an upcoming minimalist fantasy RPG written by Yokai Gal and planned to release in 2024. Now, it should be kickstarting in March, which should be shortly after this video airs, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And it will include the main books with stretch goals for additional content like adventures. And it is entirely backwards compatible with its 1st edition. Oh, and it's also got a Creative Commons license like the 1st edition does.
Oh, okay, good. I actually missed that part if it was going to be more restricted, but good.
No, definitely not. First thing we're going to notice when we get into this book is principles of play are back, baby. The thing we liked so much about the first book, they're back, but this time they are just player-focused ones, and that is because there is now 2 books for Cairn. There is going to be a separate Warden, or the DM, guide, and that's being written for this edition. So we don't have access to that. We only have access to the demo of the player's guide, which does not include all the art, but it still gives us a lot of cool stuff to look through, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the player's guide includes everything for character creation, the basic rules of the game, and some other bits. So let's talk about what's different from Cairn 1st edition, right? We've got bonds and we've got omens. Now, these are basically just narrative hooks, and bonds are going to be giving one for each player, narrative hook, and an omen is going to just be for one party member and is a little more dramatic, I think. But we'll talk a little bit about
do you have
what those
a
mean
omen
later.
If you have a bond, or is it like everybody gets a bond but one person gets an omen?
Yeah, I think one person also gets an omen, right? There is a new item category, which is called petty, and going with the Cairn theme, it is not just like that kind of petty, but actually petty refers to items that are so small that they don't take up an inventory slot. Something like a ring or an amulet, you know? This is kind of a big deal considering how inventory-focused Cairn is, as again, you would see from our first read-through. So really great rules addition for that. Backgrounds in 2nd edition are greatly expanded. So they're not just a collection of items, though they still do have those. There are also several tables that you roll up to generate special starting items unique to that background and character abilities in some cases. The whole background specific character abilities really seems like a huge deal to me in this. Like it's the biggest rules departure. And it's such a big difference from the idea in 1st edition where your character is just defined by your items. I mean, heck, like if these backgrounds had some kind of level progression table, they would straight up just be classes. But don't tell Yokai that they're like classes because he hates classes. Don't let him please say that.
Oh no, I would agree. It feels very much like and they all have fun names too. Like I like the barber surgeon, like the demon barber Fleet Street is what it reminds me of.
We're definitely gonna get
like a lot of these are they feel familiar, but they're also very thematic. Like they have like a trope kind of underscore to them. But at the same time, I could play I don't know, like a cut purse, but be more of a magic user rather than a thief or something. So you're not limited, but it is kind of like, what is your personality like? And then with those random tables in there, there's lots of ways to mix it up for every background. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, totally. There's so much more specific flavor in this. Let's actually just jump into that section real quick, because I think that's good for our intro. So, Cairn 1E was really a vanilla fantasy TTRPG. Pretty much as vanilla as you can get. I mean, there were a little bit of, like, sort of woodsy fantasy elements to it, but it was pretty vanilla. And its sequel is a bit different. Like, I mean, it's not like pistachio or anything, but it's like a nice coffee or like a black raspberry. So we don't have those generic fantasy backgrounds anymore. Those are gone from second edition. We also don't have the totally randomized character creation that we see in second edition either, or in first edition either. Whereas in first edition, we had things like the cleric and the knight. Second edition gives us stuff like the Arifex, which is like a mad scientist, kind of. And the Montebank, which is kind of like a con artist. And like the stuff you were talking about earlier, like the Bone Keeper, right? So there's a lot of implicit setting info that shows up in these backgrounds. And it's really cool and very different.
Yeah, the half witch, the Hex and Hexabane, like it seems very tied to the setting, maybe. And I could be wrong, but
no, it is. It's very. I mean, we'll get a little bit into the setting stuff in a minute, but it definitely is, and it goes a long way towards being like, this is the kinds of games you're gonna play, and that's really reinforced with the bonds and omens thing that we talked about earlier. So like they're narrative hooks, but a lot of them are narrative hooks that say like, oh, this section of the world you have a special tie to, or like this NPC, or an NPC that's like this that fits into the world you have a special tie to. Let me actually see if I can bring up an example. So if we're looking at bonds on the first page of that, yeah, there's a distant cousin left you a small inheritance, and then you get like an ornate compass, but it always points towards something deep in the woods. So we know that the woods is going to be relevant, right? Because it's specifically tied to an item that you have. There's also things like gates. Those are important. But then when we get into stuff like omens, those make references to things like the woods, but also the roots, which is a separate thing. And it's just like, okay, we're starting our character when we roll these things, and now we have specific ties to the world. So setting is super baked in. It's worth noting that the end of the book has an unfinished section in it called the Vald, which is the setting. So we're assuming that that's going to be way more fleshed out in the future, and I guess having it in the player book means that players are going to get to read up on that before, they actually start playing, which is probably good because they will have developed questions about things like what exactly are the woods or the roots before they actually get into the game, right? Now, it seems like Cairn 2e is more unique and tailored in its play experience than 1e was, for certain. But is that good or is that bad?
Very good question. We've talked about this probably off the air before, that I've always really enjoyed when system and setting are married. Like, I think that makes a really creative thing, because if I'm going to play a Cairn game, rather than just the tool set and some random tables, I can now be a part of the woods, the roots. Like, I can be a part of Vald and actually like get into it. Games like Numenera does this. Like, Monty Cook's big on theme fitting in with his games. Not that that's OSR, but it made me think of is that where the OSR is heading, specifically because of this and the success of Dolmenwood, which is taking old school essentials and really marrying old school essentials with Dolmenwood, and they're going to be like one big game now. And it is more difficult to separate yourself from Dolmenwood and use that system to play whatever generic game you want to play. You know, like in your homebrew setting. Think of like Into the Odd, like very cool game, or Electric Bastion Land, like Electric Bastion Land, which is Into the Odd and Chris McDowell, that utilizes that, but it's very tied to the city that he created for that. So
yeah, even something like Shadow Dark, right, which is pretty vanilla, but it has this implied like this is going to be a grimdark game that you're playing. So yeah,
it might not necessarily give you a world, but it's like, you know, I don't know. Yeah, that's the type of game you're playing. And so I don't know, is that good or bad? I don't know, because like we still have vanilla Cairn, like Cairn 1E, and I can take that and do whatever I want with it.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because they're compatible. So you're really not losing any flexibility options because you still have the first edition. So you just have more specific options for storytelling in the second edition. I think it might be one of those things where, like, especially with the bonds and flaws, you're getting all of these hooks, and then the game master is going to have to then incorporate those hooks into whatever game they're making. And like that can feel like an imposition maybe to some, but I think that if you're really into the setting and that's why you're playing it, then that's probably not going to be that big a deal to you.
And honestly, a creative person who's probably come up with their own world at this point could weave those omens and stuff into their setting in a fun and different way. So
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But I just find it interesting that I feel like the OSR is pushing more into that setting, like that fusion. And so it's like would I use Shatterdark rules to play in a Cairn world? You know, I think it's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah. The biggest expansion to the rules in the player's guide is definitely the procedures chapter. Now, this book has has step-by-step instructions for exploring a dungeon, for traveling through the wilderness, or for having downtime. In dungeons, we have rules for how to rest, how to deal with traps, how to go through doors, how to handle light. In the wilderness, we have rules for watches, for travel time, for terrain, and for weather, all those kind of things, right? These procedures are sort of more modernized versions of the kind of rules that we would see in like a BX D&D. So I was like looking back at my OSE books and looking at the procedures in there and then the procedures in here, and it was like, oh yeah, this is definitely like, I can see the roots of these things in BX, and now they're appearing in Cairn.
Yokai just does a really good job of simplifying and explaining things.
Yes.
So I feel like these are not brand new rules, but they are very concise. I understand them. I can reference them very quickly and know exactly what I'm doing. Like for wilderness, I know what's happening at night. I know how many hours in a day. I can calculate travel really simple. And so in typical OSR fashion, he's made it very easy to navigate and to understand. And like as I scroll up, there's a whole bunch of text right here, but like there's not that much text. There's just like, I don't know, it's just visually like this is what you do, and it makes sense to me. So I really like that as well. And I feel like I've read a lot specifically of hex crawls and wilderness. I've read a lot on that, and I'm always kind of like, well, how does this game want me to do it? There's like a mini game within it, and this one, it's not that. Like, it's just, this is how you do it. It's very straightforward. So
yeah, no, I love the weather and the traveling rules. Yeah. I would definitely like import them into like any other game because they're so nicely put together. Now, most of Cairn 2e, like its predecessor, is very rules light. However, like what we just discussed, we get like a solid 10 pages of rules of procedures in here.
Yeah.
Which is like almost as long as the first game, right? Now, that's not to say these rules aren't clearly presented as we discussed, but it does feel at odds to me maybe with like the rest of the system. How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I think authors want to write and they want to expand upon stuff. I'm also trying to think of the original Cairn did not have that much art. And the PDF we're looking at has a lot of empty space, which is placement for art, I assume.
Yeah.
But it is the next logical step You know, whenever you get to a certain point with a very basic RPG, everybody at the table understands it. You start thinking like, well, what do we do next? Oh, well, let's have a mini system for wilderness, or let's have a renown system so I can make friends and do things like that. And I feel like that's what this is doing. Like, it's extrapolating on the things players will want to do. So is it a little more, I mean, it is more pages, yes, but I still think it's very concise and to the point and fits well in the OSR mantra, if that is anything. I don't know if there's actually like some code up on a piece of parchment hung in a mountain somewhere that's like, this is what the OSR is, but it feels very much like that.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, I think because they're so modular, especially with the procedure stuff, they're so modular that you could just be like, I don't know, this campaign won't really have any overland travel, so we don't have to worry about that. The second installment of Cairn stretches its legs in a few setting and mechanical areas without losing backwards compatibility or seeming very overwhelming for newcomers. Is it the pocket-sized RPG first edition was? No. But it can be, just depending on how much you want to use. So I would certainly still recommend it in a heartbeat. But do we want to talk a little bit about the Kickstarter and some of the sort of additional content that's going to show up in it?
Sure. So we're recording this in November, the end of November. And I'm not, it looks like the last playtest on the website was September 30th of 2023.
Well, that's when this update was for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So specifically, what is in the Kickstarter? I guess you would know better than I would.
Well, so it's going to be a box set, right? Which is pretty cool. So we're going to have the player guide. We're going to have the warden's guide. We're going to have tear-off character sheets, which I love. I love tear-off character sheets. We're going to have a starting adventure. And then we're going to have optional extra copies of the player's guide printed at cost, which is cool.
And then stretch goals.
Yeah. Then we're looking at our stretch goals. So our stretch goals are stuff like a DM screen, an adventure anthology. Also, I want to point out that there's only 3 people listed for writers for the adventures, but they're all like really, really good.
Yeah.
So we have Brad Kerr, who wrote Hideous Daylight and Wyvern Songs, Fabian's Altier, really Demon Driven to the Maw, really amazing adventure writer. Also hangs out with Yokai a lot because they do their podcast together between two Cairns. So I kind of expected his name to be on here. Amanda P., who I know is friends with Yokai and has written, I'm forgetting the name of the adventure, but some really interesting stuff for adventures. And then
side note, is that the Garbage Barge person or no?
No, that's Amanda Lee Frank.
Okay, but it is Amanda, so
yeah, they're both Amanda.
I noted that. Sorry.
Yeah. Then we also have Zedek Sue, who is famous for 1,000 Islands, among many other projects. So just even though it's only 3 names, and then it says and more, so more people will probably be added. But just the fact that those 3 people are going to be writing an adventure anthology for the stretch goals of this, and the fact that this will probably hit its stretch goals, I'm very excited about that. I think that's really, really cool. Something to look forward to. There's going to be an online setting generator. That's really interesting to me because this book, we just talked about how setting specific everything is. But now Yokai's like, oh, well, as a stretch goal, you can generate your own setting. So that's cool. Arts and crafts tokens, fun, and localization, which is something that Yokai has cared a lot about for the first edition of the game, just making sure it's in a lot of different languages. Amanda Lee Frank has been hired to do interior art.
I just saw that too. So yeah, that's great.
So that's going to be cool. But yeah, those are the big things that are going to be in the Kickstarter. So just for you at home watching this, that's what to look forward to and reasons to back it, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
But
so then is this the future of the OSR where your game and setting kind of come together? Like your first edition is I make the game, and your second edition is now the game comes with a sandbox to play in? I'm kind of curious.
I think it is. I think it's actually kind of already been that way for a little while. It's like you have those games like White Box or Osric that have been around forever, and those are the ones that are just like super vanilla retro clones. And I think that although those get new additions, which is good that they don't like leave the scene, but I think in terms of new things coming into the scene, for a while now, we've really seen a lot of stuff that has setting closely tied into it. And yeah, I think we're going to continue to see that. That's my guess.
It's really curious though, because I think people who watch this channel probably know this, but just because it's second edition doesn't mean that it's this, it doesn't make first edition obsolete. And
no, totally
much
not.
like you were just saying with Osric and stuff, like there are people that still play a lot of those and they get updates to fix minor things. And probably Cairn first edition would get updates to fix minor things if something came out that needed to be fixed. But then it really does make sense that tooey, Cairn tooey would be with a setting more, much like Dolmen would. And I'm assuming Mothership is, well, they're coming out with their first edition, but whenever second edition comes out, there'll probably be a whole like universal thing that they come out with. So, no, it's really cool. And I love, I obviously love campaign settings. I love worlds and stuff like that. So I'm excited for stuff like this. And I really like Yokai's thought process and his how he tackles games and how he just like how he thinks about them and how he approaches them. So I'm very excited for this, and I probably will be backing it. So
yeah, check out the free PDF for the demo of the Player's Guide now. There, by the time this video airs, there may be a demo of the Warden's Guide. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out prior to the Kickstarter, but 100% check out this Kickstarter, back it. It looks like this is going to be another great game coming out soon.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and subscribe for more, as we'll be releasing more games with Lex, and we'll see you all in the next video.